Hey, Truth Seekers, welcome back. Zach here. For some reason, I can't get my Dan Behrendt voice manipulation off or my Dan Behrendt costume off today, so if I look and sound a little bit different, that's why, because that makes a whole lot of sense. But normally with my Dan Behrendt character, I don't address trolled comments, but even in his fictional town of Dunlap, Iowa, there are a lot of people who leave comments and say things such as this. Why can't you predict anything with this information? And this video just goes out to all of these people in the fictional town of Dunlap, Iowa, the fictional area of wherever Dan Behrendt is, and the fictional things of Dan Behrendt's character. And, also to these trolls. And anyway, it's apparent that these people have never applied this knowledge for themselves, or they're just being trolls, or they've actually never watched any of my character of Dan Behrendt's videos, because if they actually would watch these videos, they would see that he's talked about numerous things before they happen and also has predicted multiple events. For the record, too, this knowledge isn't just all about predicting events and talking about how it syncs up to Gematria. If you pay enough attention to my Dan Behrendt character videos here, he talks a lot about other things, such as other patterns and themes, and also synchronicity, and how you can just understand this better if you understand the language of Gematria, the practice of coding numbers into words and phrases. And predicting events, it's a good thing, and it's definitely something that needs to be done with this knowledge, but at the same time, the bigger purpose is to show people that all of the world is a stage. And if you don't understand that all of the world is a stage after watching these videos, even in hindsight, then you're just a fucking moron. Oop. Sorry, my voice translation thing just must have started working again for a second. I'll get back to it though. Let's look at some examples here. And this person right here, I don't even know how let's zoom out here. If I can zoom out, I don't even think they even watched the video that I had just recently put out. They're writing on here how I don't predict anything. If you actually listen to the video, in the video I even talked about how I talked about Ross Perot last April, and then Ross Perot died in July. And literally, who was talking about Ross Perot in 2019 of all days? And then Ross Perot dies on the same day that Tom Steyer, the billionaire, announces he's going to run for president. They also share the same birthday, Ross Perot, the billionaire. What are the odds? But also in the video, a big thing I talked about was how last year I predicted that a racer or something to do with NASCAR would die on the date of August 31st, and it was connected to the country of France, because the owner or the founder of NASCAR is named Bill France, and it was synced up to this day where Princess Diana had died in a car wreck in France, and then on that day, we got the death of the French racer named Antoine Hubert. If you'd actually paid attention in this video, I made that pretty clear in this video. So, a great trolled comment. You don't even know what you're talking about, considering apparently you didn't even watch the video, just like all these people that I know around me who want to talk shit, and they have no idea because they don't apply it for themselves. So there's two examples. If you want to go clear back, and there's probably even more. Just thinking off the top of my head here. Remember the Golden State Warriors that I predicted to beat the Cleveland Cavaliers in the year 2015, when the Golden State Warriors started their big reign of popularity and whatever else? Clear back then, I was talking about how it was important to Pope Francis's visit, the film Space Jam, because Zach LaVine did the Space Jam dunk at the NBA All-Star game, or the All-Star Week, and a bunch of the main players were all injured that year, reminding me of how in Space Jam, they all of the main players got taken away by the aliens and so on. They did the Space Jam dunk. I was talking a lot about Michael Jordan, and he did that Space Jam dunk on Valentine's Day. And the Cavaliers had Kevin Love, who wore the number 0, which was the Monstars number. So, clear back then I talked about how I thought the Golden State Warriors were going to beat the Cleveland Cavaliers in the NBA Finals, synced up to Valentine's Day. And in Gematria, this language of coding numbers into words. And we'll just use 2 ciphers here because, apparently 8 ciphers is just too much to handle, because if you study these for multiple years with 2 ciphers and then learn that there's other ciphers that are important and they complement the other ones, like I've explained a billion times on here, then you would get this. But in these 2 ciphers, Golden State equals 122, and they won the NBA Finals 122 days after Valentine's Day. And it was also synced up to Pope Francis's visit in 2015 that was coming up later that year, and we had that Philadelphia train wreck. We talked about how the Golden State Warriors were originally from Philadelphia, and LeBron James was going to be in that movie called Trainwreck with Amy Schumer later in the summer. And if you notice that, if you read out Pope Francis equals 122 as well. And also, Cleveland Cavaliers just so happened to equal 168. And later that year in the World Series, which, by the way, in the beginning of October, I predicted the Royals to beat the New York Mets, and I had the New York Mets all year because they even make fun of them, or they talk about them in the movie Trainwreck with LeBron James and so on. But notice how New York Mets equals the same thing as Cleveland Cavaliers, and then they lost in the World Series, and they lost to Kansas City. Kansas City equals 122, like Golden State, like Pope Francis. And I also mentioned how there was a theme with Queen Elizabeth and Pope Francis all that year. And look what Queen Elizabeth II equals. Queen Elizabeth II, 168. The New York Mets playing Queens, and they lost to the Royals in the World Series. What are the odds? A big thing that it was important to as well was that there was a guy who dressed up like Pope Francis at the Kansas City Royals game on the date of 6/6 that year. 6/6/15, which, right? 1/5, 1 plus 5 is 6, a lot like 666. Think about that in regards to Pope Francis and the Catholic Church. Important number, So then, later that year, the Super Bowl, I thought the Kansas City Chiefs were going to win. I was wrong on this, but it was Super Bowl 50, right? And notice how Chiefs equal 50. And think about how the Chiefs won this year for the first time in 50 years. And they just so happened to beat the San Francisco 49ers, who hosted Super Bowl 50. And Chiefs equal 50. And back at that time, I was even talking about how there was this big narrative with the Chiefs, the Eagles, and the Rams, and how they were all interrelated into this theme with the Nebraska Cornhuskers. And then in 2018, I predicted the Eagles to win the Super Bowl because of a 4.1 earthquake that was all synced up to that. And, of course, the word Super Bowl equals 41, and the Eagles went on to win with 41 points. But I also predicted Pink to sing the national anthem at that Super Bowl as well. Over a month before they even announced Pink was going to sing the national anthem, I predicted that Pink would sing the national anthem. What are the odds of that, Pretty random person just randomly pick Pink to sing the national anthem. But remember how the Chiefs won this year, right? 50 years. The Eagles had won, and then the next year I started thinking maybe it's going to be the Rams and then the Chiefs. And that's exactly what happened. And the reason why was because I was following this big narrative with the War of 1812 and the kneeling during the national anthem. That was the War of 1812 was when the Star Spangled Banner was written and so on. And, clear back in the preseason here, what was it? August 30th of 2018, before the Rams went on to win the Super Bowl, or went on to lose in the Super Bowl to the Patriots. I had talked about, I think the Rams are the team to watch this year. Possibly it's just being used in the symbolism, but a lot of the stuff that I was following that year was synced up to the Rams, right? Teddy Bridgewater went to the Saints, and you had to go back and watch all of my 2015 stuff where it was synced up to the Nebraska Cornhuskers. That was also important to the NBA All-Star Week that year, and how it fell over the festival of Lupercalia. And that's why Zach LaVine, who was a teenager at the time, and he played for the Timberwolves, so he was a teen wolf, did the Space Jam dunk. And that's why the night before, Andrew Wiggins, a teen wolf, won the Rising Star Challenge of the MVP and got the MVP or whatever. And That's also why Russell Westbrook won the MVP of the All-Star game, because he played for UCLA. Andrew Wiggins was traded for Kevin Love, who played for UCLA. Zach LaVine played for UCLA. And in the movie Teen Wolf, there's Nebraska Cornhusker stuff all throughout the background, and it makes no sense because the movie is apparently not set or filmed there, right? And then what happened? Just before Super Bowl 50, the Nebraska Cornhuskers somehow got a bowl game with a 5-7 record, and they played UCLA in the Foster Farms Bowl of all teams, UCLA in San Francisco, where Super Bowl 50 was held, right? Nebraska also had just got their coach Mike Riley, who came from the Oregon State Beavers. He's known for the Oregon State Beavers. And if you look up the movie Teen Wolf, the beaver mascot in the movie is based off of the Oregon State Beaver. So, once again, though, I don't predict anything or talk about anything that matters. It's all just meaningless nonsense. Remember too, just before the Rams lost to the Patriots in the Super Bowl, I kept saying how it was synced up to the Nebraska Cornhuskers. There's this big theme with the Nebraska Cornhuskers, and then the Patriots go on to make the Super Bowl because of a score by the ex-Nebraska Cornhusker Rex Burkhead, and then the Rams went on to make the Super Bowl by a field goal by their kicker named Greg Zuerlein, and he, of course, was from Lincoln, Nebraska, and then the head referee of the Super Bowl was also from Lincoln, Nebraska, and they also had, Ndamukong Suh, and there was also the Covington High School stuff, the racist stuff that was going on, and that Native American guy, he was part of the Omaha tribe, and I believe he was also from Lincoln, Nebraska. I could be wrong on that, I can't remember, but it was at the Lincoln Memorial, right? All synced up to all of these things that I was talking about. So to say that it is pointless and I never predict anything or it has no worth, it's just absolutely stupid. Remember, too, when the Royals won the World Series, it was synced up to Back to the Future. Remember how the Cubs were supposed to win in 2015? And I did a bunch of research into this. And that's why I discovered the Curse of the Billy Goat and how it synced up to the number 108. And then, predicted the Cubs to go on and win the World Series the next year. And I even predicted that they would beat the Indians in the World Series and even play the Indians about halfway through the season when the Indians, I don't even think were even winning their division yet. Or if they were, they weren't winning by very much, in July. And then, there's all kinds of Native American things going on in the news. Like, that boy that got ate by an alligator was at the Disney World or whatever. He was synced up to the Indians. Then we had Chief David Bald Eagle die, and he's in the movie Dances with Wolves, and Dances with Wolves stars Kevin Costner, who's also in Field of Dreams. And then we had the guy who wrote Shoeless Joe, the inspiration for the movie Shoeless Joe, die in September that year. Then James Earl Jones, his wife died at the same time the World Series was going on. He's the other guy in Field of Dreams. And, just a number of other things. The Standing Rock stuff that got real popular while the Indians were, just before the Indians made the World Series. Think about it. Native Americans, the Indians, Standing Rock. That's how the media does things. The Royals were synced up to the Back to the Future that year, though, because the same day that Marty McFly returns to 1985, he returns on October 27th, 1985. That is the same day that the Kansas City Royals had last won the World Series, October 27th, 1985. And Marty McFly on his Toyota car, it even has the KC Daylighters. And remember how the Chicago Cubs got knocked out of the playoffs on Back to the Future Day? Oh, the odds, the year they're supposed to go on and win the World Series according to Back to the Future, and then on Back to the Future Day, they lose their game and get knocked out of the playoffs. Then the Royals, the team who won on the exact day Marty McFly returns to the future, or to 1985. It's such a joke. So let's get off of sports here for a second. Let's talk about some other things that aren't related. They're related to sports, but it's not all about sports. Remember how the Indians hadn't won a World Series since the year 1948, and we later learned that Cleveland equals 48, and this was just before Donald Trump won the election, and the Simpsons predicted that Donald Trump would be the president before he'd be the president before the first woman president, and that was at the Indian Casino when Bart has a vision. But Donald Trump equals 48, and he's the guy who wanted to build the wall, and wall equals 48. And, you know, he won the election on the anniversary of the Berlin Wall coming down, and then they came out with that game show called The Wall with LeBron James in it. Then the movie with Matt Damon called The Wall, just after Trump became the president, came out on the 48th day of the year. You know, not like it was planned or anything. It's just that all synced up by that way, you know. And anyway, there was a big important thing too as well, because Donald Trump won the first election upset, or the biggest election upset since the year 1948, when Thomas E. Dewey was upset by Harry S. Truman. And Harry S. Truman was the president during the Korean War, right? Think about how Donald Trump then becomes the president, and he does all the stuff with Korea, even goes and meets Kim Jong-un, and, you know, North Korea equals 48. Or Kim Jong-un equals 48. So does Russia, who supposedly meddled in the election. Russia equals 48, right? But moral of the story, just after the World Series on November 14th, we were also getting the closest supermoon since the year 1948. And earlier in that year, I had talked about how I thought some of the moon phases were synced up to earthquakes, and how the supermoon, I felt like there was going to be an important earthquake or something that was associated with it, because earlier in the year we had the corn moon, and just after the corn moon there was that big earthquake in Oklahoma that was synced up to Sam Bradford going to the Minnesota Vikings and this big Ram theme that I was following. But I won't talk about that. But, you know, then on the same day as the supermoon that year, we had a major earthquake in Christchurch, New Zealand. And this is why the reverse ciphers are important, because back then I did not even know the reverse ciphers. I was just following this pattern with the moons and how it synced up to earthquakes. And well, look at the reverse here. When you type out supermoon equals 107 and 44. And look at the frontwards way here. Look at the word earthquake equals 107 and 44. And we get a major earthquake on the same day that I'm talking about. It's important to the closest supermoon since the year 1948. Then like a week after this, I started talking about how there was a space moon theme that was going on. And I mentioned how it was important to Neil Armstrong, the first guy to walk on the moon, and also Eugene Cernan, who was the last guy to step foot on the moon. And I didn't know what it all meant, but I knew there was some type of space and moon theme. And then like a week later, we got the death of John Glenn, right? The astronaut John Glenn. And we also got a story about Buzz Aldrin, the second guy to walk on the moon. He was there with Neil Armstrong and so on. Buzz Aldrin got hospitalized I think it was in New Zealand. It was Australia or New Zealand. And then a month after that, Eugene Cernan died. What are the odds that Eugene Cernan would die, you know, just a little over a month after I'd mentioned how there's this space moon theme that's important to Eugene Cernan? Then he dies. And in my video about him, I even talked about Don Rickles. Let me just pull it up here. I talked about the importance of Don Rickles, the comedian who did a Comedy Central roast of Eugene Cernan. And, you know, it was important to the roast of Donald Trump, and the roasts were really important. Talked about the roast of Rob Lowe and how it was important to the World Series in 2015 and the curse of Fred Savage and Rob Lowe, if you go back and watch that. But, you know, I mentioned Don Rickles and his importance, and then Don Rickles just so happens to die on April 6th, just like 3 months after Eugene Cernan dies. Who was even talking about Don Rickles in January of 2017? Absolutely nobody, you know? Nobody was talking about Don Rickles in January of 2017 being important to some narrative with a space and moon theme, and Eugene Cernan dying just after I talk about a theme with Eugene Cernan, you know? I didn't necessarily predict that he would die, but what are the odds that he would die after I even bring him up, you know? This same space theme, I was following it into the year 2018, and we had this, so it was after the Eagles had won the Super Bowl, And then we had the Stoneman Douglas Eagles get shot up, and we had that Falcon Heavy launch that was a tribute to the Eagles, or the Eagle landing on the moon in 1969 with Neil Armstrong. And then an Eagle landed on, we had the death of Bill Paxton, right? The actor in the movie Twister, and he's also in the movie Apollo 13. And he died in 2017, and then the next year, after the Eagles won, we had the Eagle land on James Paxton, and the Eagle's name was Challenger, which is also a lunar module that had landed on the moon. So it just made me wonder, and I pointed out, I said, I think we're going to get the death of another astronaut that walked on the moon this year in 2018. And then a little over a month later, Alan Bean, the fourth person to walk on the moon, had died, right? And once again, there's only 12 people in the world who supposedly walked on the moon. And they are all getting older, but they don't always die. And they don't always die just like a month and a half after somebody mentions how they think that one of the 12 people that have walked on the moon is going to die. And keep in mind, I think there was only, over half of them had already died. So what are the odds, Sorry, I had to go get my fictional character's son here. But actually, he's real. I just picked him up at the CIA agency at the local Walmart while I was out trying to get some toilet paper. But you want to make a video, man? Want to try to make a video? I'm going to take you back to Walmart later anyway. Oh, it's okay. We can make a video. Here. Say hi. Show them how you can jump. Jump, jump, jump. Jump, jump, jump. All right. Well, I'll come back later and finish this video. I just wanted to show you my store-bought son here. So, and maybe I'll try to get my voice translator thing working. I'll be back in a little while. Well, it's about 4 hours later. I couldn't figure it out. I still have to be the character of Dan Behrendt. Maybe I'll have to call Alex Jones over and have him show me how to fix it, but that's for another time. Remember the time that after leading up to when the Eagles won the Super Bowl, I was talking all about how it was connected to bridges, and the Super Bowl was going to be held in Minnesota that had the famous bridge collapse that happened on August 1st, right? This famous bridge collapse happened on 8/1, and the bridge fell 81 feet, and the main trusses were 81 meters long. And in the story, it told us that it took them 81 minutes to transport everyone to the hospital. And it just so happened the year that the Eagles won the Super Bowl, it was the 81st anniversary of the Golden Gate Bridge that year. And in Gematria, if you write out Golden Gate Bridge, it just so happens to equal 81 in the frontwards way and 81 in the backwards way. And I was talking about how San Francisco was important to earthquakes, and it was synced up to the Pope. Pope Francis is named after Francis of Assisi, who is also where San Francisco got their name from. And in the Hebrew lettering, if you read out the word Pope, it equals 81, and Pope Francis was 81 years old. And he was the first Jesuit Pope, and his birthday was 81 days after the Jesuit anniversary. And then I talked about how 8 months and 1 day after his birthday was 8/1/8 of the year 18. A lot of 81 stuff and all this bridge collapse stuff. And after the Eagles won the Super Bowl, we just so happened to get that pedestrian bridge collapse that happened at the FIU college in Miami, right? FIU on the Ides of March. And then later in August, we got that bridge collapse in Italy, where the Pope is from. This one just so happened to be on the 44th mayor of San Francisco's birthday. His name's Mark Farrell. He turned 44 years old on this day. Remember how the word earthquake equals 44? And he turned 44 years old. And he became the mayor 4 months and 4 days before the 81st anniversary of the Golden Gate Bridge. And then literally the next mayor was London Breed. Her name even reminds us of London Bridge, and much, much more, Just ridiculous. Then just after this thing, we had the Austin Bomber, right? And that was synced up to the WWE and also the Ides of March, because later that year we had the mail package bombings, and the guy's name in the mail package bomb, his name was Caesar Sayok, And the guy who did this, the Austin bombing, was Mark Anthony Condit. Think about Mark Antony, Caesar, the Ides of March. So we were telling people to watch out for the Ides of March, and then what happened in 2019 on the Ides of March? Literally got the mosque shooting at Christ Church and so on. Christ Church, the mosque shooting. Such a joke. Remember, too, with the Eagle stuff, I talked about how it was synced up to my grandma dying. My grandma, who used to live on Eagle Street. And the year before, after my Uncle Barney had died, I went over to her house and my Uncle Clancy was there. And I found out that my sister, I was talking about all the stuff with the NFL and whatever. And at that time, at my grandma's house, I found out that my sister owned a company called Eagle Acres. And I had no idea of this. And she also lived on Falcon Avenue. And the Falcons had just won the Super Bowl, synced up to the death of my Uncle Barney. Big long story, but he died in a car wreck just before the town where the Falcons play. And it was synced up to this Dan Marino jersey he gave me and The Simpsons. And when I looked up the only episode with Dan Marino and The Simpsons, it just so happened to be the one where the Falcons win the Super Bowl. It's also the one that everyone was saying was the San Francisco 49ers, right? I don't remember if the Falcons won on that episode, but this year everybody was saying that was the San Francisco 49ers, and the Simpsons predicted the 49ers to win the Super Bowl. It was that same exact episode, so I knew it was still important to the old things that I was talking about, which made me think about the Chiefs as well. But, I didn't really make a prediction this year for the NFL. I followed a lot of different things. I followed the Chiefs a whole bunch, but the Ravens really threw me for a loop, considering they met the Pope and they were both the Blackbird. They were a Blackbird that was synced up to Charles Manson, which, by the way, got to be the only person in the world who was talking about how Charles Manson was important to the kneeling during the national anthem. And then, 3 weeks later, Charles Manson falls over dead, supposedly? But back to the thing about the Eagles and my sister. So my sister owns Eagle Acres. My grandma lives on Eagle Street. She died. Then after the Eagles won the Super Bowl, my Uncle Clancy, the other person that was there, he died, right? And just weird, he just, all of a sudden, his lung just collapsed, and then he dies 3 months later, Healthy guy, doesn't have cancer, nothing, and somehow his lung just collapses. But that Super Bowl, when the Eagles played in the Super Bowl, they had a commercial that had Audubon, Iowa in it. And they have this giant bull statue that they have outside in the town. And they made a joke about how they had the Super Bowl, and it was the Super Bowl. And then, like a month later, some little kid from that town, died in a river up north. I can't remember what it is. I can't remember exactly, a river or lake. And when I looked up that place, it said the last person who died there was a guy named Lyle Eagletail. Now, what are the odds of that? Lyle Eagletail. My sister owns Eagle Acres. Talking about my grandma who just died. She lives on Eagle Avenue. By the way, my grandma, speaking of this, what are the odds of this? My other neighbor, I had 3 neighbors at that time. My grandma lived behind me. And then my other neighbor, who was a huge Chicago Cubs fan and died just after the Chicago Cubs, he died after the Cubs had won the World Series. But he literally was born in the same year as my grandma, and they were born 56 days apart. And then they both died in the same year, and they died 56 days apart. What are the odds of that? They live next to each other. They were born 56 days apart, and they died 56 days apart. And my other neighbor was important to that too, but she still has not died, thankfully, But telling you, I follow other patterns. It's not just within the media, following these other synchronicity things. But let's move on here. Let's do another sports one really quick. Remember how, was it last season in the NBA, before LeBron James turned 34 years old in November, I talked about how I thought LeBron James was going to get injured that season, and it was all synced up to the number 34. and Kobe Bryant, who injured his Achilles when he was age 34. He scored 34 points in that game and came back in the 34th week later on Dwight Howard's birthday. And then I even predicted that Dwight Howard would possibly go back to the Lakers this year because he was going to turn 34 years old, and it was synced up to Kobe Bryant. And then he signs with the Lakers on Kobe Bryant's 41st birthday. Kobe Bryant equals 41. He dies age 41. This is why you need to know more ciphers too. Kobe Bryant equals 41. He died 157 days after his birthday. He equals 113. His first ever game was on 11/3. The National Basketball Association equals 113. Michael Jordan equals 113. Los Angeles Lakers equal 58. So does Dwight Howard. So does DeMarcus Cousins. This big narrative that I was talking about. You need to know all of these. They're all important. And if even before I knew these two were just as important, Kobe Bryant's helicopter crashed after 41 minutes. His final game, he came out of the game with 4.1 seconds left. He scored 60 points. The rest of the team scored 41 points. And so on. His 81-point game, the rest of the team scored 41 points, and he scored 81 points. And look what his full name is, Kobe Bean Bryant. 81. He also died 5 months and 4 days after his birthday, 54, and so on. His daughter's name, I believe, equaled 54. And 126, and they died on January 26th. And Kobe Bryant's wife, her birthday's on the 126th day this year. All just made up stuff, though. It's just too many ciphers and whatever else. But LeBron James did get injured that year. LeBron James got injured on the Lakers' 34th game of the season, just before turning 34 years old. And they were playing the Golden State Warriors, which is the team that Kobe Bryant tore his Achilles against in history, right? Keep in mind, too, Kobe Bryant died on the 3rd month and 4th day of this year's NBA season, and a bunch more. I have a whole video on it if you want to take the time and listen to it and, maybe gain a little bit of knowledge, or I guess, I'm just making everything up, though, so. What about, too, another one, remember the blackface stuff that was going on? You probably already forgot about it if you're new to this channel, and, you're probably never going to watch this video anyway. So, the blackface stuff. The Virginia guy did it just after Lil Bow Wow was in the media for getting beat up by his girlfriend, right? Lil Bow Wow. And they kept calling it a minstrel show. And the last time that I had heard the phrase minstrel show, well, my internet's going to load here, but the last time that I heard that was from Don Lemon. He kept calling Donald Trump a minstrel show or something of the sort. And he had some interview, and he said that with Don Lemon, and he said that he didn't like LeBron James. He liked Mike, right? Like Mike. And Lil Bow Wow's in that movie called Like Mike. And when I went to my channel and I searched the word minstrel show, or the phrase minstrel show, we'll see if it still does it. Now nothing will come up. Maybe it was just minstrel. We'll see what happens here. Well, when I did this before, it brought up my old video about Lil Bow Wow retiring from rap. And I talked all about the movie Like Mike and why it was important. So I knew there was something important to that movie, and the famous song in the movie is called Basketball by Curtis Blow. And I even mentioned how I think that, we're going to get something to do with Curtis Blow and all this blackface stuff. And then a few days later, the Virginia Attorney General, it came out that he had once wore blackface, just like Curtis Blow, of all people, So, apparently I didn't say anything about Curtis Blow being in the news for the blackface stuff. And it was all synced up to the number 42 as well. And, the super N-word equals 42. And February, Black History Month equals 42. And a number of other things. But it was all about the song Basketball. So I knew it was also synced up to basketball. And I talked about the Virginia Cavaliers. I'm pretty sure I even mentioned it in here. Oh, let's see. I'll find it here. Possibly the Virginia Cavaliers will win this year. Need to look at it more, and maybe just the catalyst to Duke. And then Duke didn't win. the Virginia Cavaliers went on to win the college basketball championship that year. I thought it was either Duke or Virginia that was going to do it. Even read it on my blog here. And Duke had Zion Williamson, and then remember his shoe blew out. And of course, in the movie Like Mike, if you go watch it, there's at the end of the movie his magic shoes blow out, just like Zion Williamson's shoe blew out. So just a coincidence that his Nike shoe blew out, and there's all this, Like Mike symbolism that's going on. I even mentioned how Maroon 5 was going to be performing at the halftime show of the Super Bowl with the Rams and so on. And they have that famous song called Moves Like Jagger, and it was even rumored that Mick Jagger was going to come and sing with them at the Super Bowl, but then Mick Jagger didn't. But Mick Jagger's in the Rolling Stones, who have the song called Paint It Black, right? Like how they painted themselves black. And then a month later, Mick Jagger was in the news for being sick, and they had to either cancel the tour or can't remember what it was. We'll see if it pulls up. He got sick, and they had to delay the tour or cancel the tour. He needed medical treatment. They had to postpone their tour just after, Maroon 5 and so on. Just after that Super Bowl too, we had the death of Luke Perry. And if you followed what I was talking about how there was this Buffy the Vampire Slayer theme from clear back in November before Luke Perry died. And Luke Perry just happened to die 3 months and 10 days after I talked about Buffy the Vampire Slayer and how the TV show debuted on the date of 3/10. And in Gematria, if you read out Buffy the Vampire Slayer, it just so happens to equal 310. And I even mentioned David Arquette was in a bloody wrestling match, and David Arquette's best friend in the movie Buffy the Vampire Slayer just so happens to be Puck, who is played by whatever his name is. I can't even think what his name is now. Luke Perry, right? So Luke Perry dies. He's in the movie Buffy the Vampire Slayer. He dies 3 months and 10 days after I mentioned how the number 310 is important to some Buffy the Vampire Slayer theme. And a number of other things with that, but I even talked about how it's synced up to the Big Bang Theory, and then the very final episode ever of the Big Bang Theory, it just so happened to have a running joke of Sarah Michelle Gellar, right? She was like the big joke of the episode. Sarah Michelle Gellar just so happens to be Buffy the Vampire Slayer on the TV show. Oh, the odds that I would talk about how it's synced up to the Big Bang Theory and whatnot. And then later that summer, right around the same time as the Garlic Festival shooting, remember the Garlic Festival shooting? China is the leading producer of garlic. I was talking about the Houston Rockets being important to China and Kobe Bryant. Then, Kobe Bryant dies right around the time of coronavirus, and he gets buried in Corona Del Mar. And think about that, China, Kobe Bryant, the Garlic Festival. Talked about all of this last summer. And anyway, around that time, we had the guy named Rutger, I think it's like this, Rutger Hauer die. He just so happened to be the lead vampire in the movie Buffy the Vampire Slayer die. So 2 people from the movie Buffy the Vampire Slayer die less than a year after I'm following this major theme with Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I didn't predict that Luke Perry was going to die, no. But what are the odds that 2 people even of Buffy the Vampire Slayer would die? Later that year, I mentioned in August, I was talking about how there was a theme with Denmark, and there was something important to Denmark. And then like the next day, the major headline was that Donald Trump wanted to buy Greenland from Denmark, And right around that same time, all year I was talking about how it was important that Slipknot was playing for the first time ever at the Iowa State Fair, and how it was synced up to Tisha B'Av and Zion. And then on August 11th, the next night, when it was, the next day, August 11th was still known as Tisha B'Av. A guy from Zion, Illinois died at the Slipknot concert, right? What are the odds? Talking about how Slipknot's important to this Zion theme and synced up to Tisha B'Av. And then just after Tisha B'Av comes to an end on August 11th, a guy from Zion, Illinois dies at the Slipknot concert. But what about a few years back when I noticed this theme with a bunch of fat comedians and the number 124? It was in August, but I made this video talking about the number 124 and fat comedians, and like Chris Farley equals 124, and John Belushi died on January 24th, and I think John Candy died like 1 month and 24 days after or before his birthday, or maybe it was 124 days, something of the sort. And I also talked about Sam Kinison, who equaled 124, and I mentioned Ralphie May was important in this, I think, because he was friends with Sam Kinison, and less than a month later, and it was also connected to the movie Uncle Buck. That was the whole reason I even noticed this theme with fat comedians in the number 124, because John Candy's in the movie Uncle Buck. And in October that year, so like a month and a half later, we got the death of a guy named Kevin Meaney, who was a fat comedian, and he was known for playing Uncle Buck on the TV show Uncle Buck. What is it? Look at his name. That equals 124. Do you think that's a coincidence? You know, it's exactly what I'm talking about. And then in December, I believe it was actually even on the date of 12/4, I was talking about Ralphie May again. I mentioned in a post how I think Ralphie May is going to die within the next year because it's synced up to this. And then he died 1 month and 24 days after the date that I put out my fat comedian video, Ralphie May, the fat comedian, right? And not only that, he died in Las Vegas just after the Las Vegas shooting, right? The whatever it was called, I can't remember what it's called now, the Route 91 Harvest Festival shooting with Jason Aldean and so on. And if you had followed me earlier in that year, back in like May, I was talking about this big Jesuit theme and how I think there's something big, like a really big event's going to happen around the time of the Jesuit anniversary, which is on 9/27, right? Just before that Las Vegas shooting. And what I noticed was the word priest in Gematria equals 87. And I was putting my daughter to bed, my fake daughter, by the way. It's not real. It's just another store-bought Walmart kid that I bought, and I had him for one night for some synchronicity that happened to me. But I was trying to get her to go to bed, and I was getting ready to watch the movie called Spotlight. And in the movie Spotlight, they talk about the 87 priests that supposedly molested kids in Boston, right? 87. Think about how the word priest equals 87. And she wanted me to turn on a different cartoon for her. My daughter did. And I jokingly turned it to South Park. I didn't even, just whatever. I knew she hated the show. And it just so happened to be the 87th episode of South Park. And that episode was called Red Hot Catholic Love. That equals 87. It was the 87th episode. And it just so happened to be the first episode where South Park touched on the stories. No, actually, no pun intended there, but South Park did the whole stuff about priests molesting kids and whatever, right? The 87th episode, and it has Gematria of 87. The word priest equals 87. The movie Spotlight that talks about the 87 priests who molest kids in Boston. And then I started writing a blog post about all of this, and my friend called me exactly 87 minutes after I started that blog post, and her name was Pam Melby. That equals 87. So, what are the odds of all that? But just a coincidence, apparently. Anyway, I mentioned a whole bunch of stuff with this and how all of the priests that I remember from the town I live in are synced up to this, such as there was a priest who we've always had this inside joke that he molested me, named Father Howard, or his name's Howard Fitzgerald. That, of course, equals 87. And the current priest right now, his name equals 87, but Father Howard actually did get busted for molesting kids, and he got kicked out of the church when he was 63 years old. And this other cool priest named Father Paul, who was a Jesuit, he just so happened to die at age 63 in a bathtub 6 months and 3 days after his birthday, after the Jesuit anniversary. And he died on the Jesuit residence at Creighton University, right? And I thought that was pretty strange, considering my uncle was a Knight of Columbus, and he also had just recently died at the age of 63. And I was just following this big narrative, and that's why I thought something big was going to happen around the time of the Jesuit anniversary. And I also randomly made this thing about The Price is Right, and this guy who got the perfect showcase on The Price is Right named Terry Neese, who also just so happened to write a book with his niece, who also went on The Price is Right like a month after he was on the show, and they sat in the same seat and everything. Terry Neese, he wrote a book all about it. It was 134 pages long. His name equals 134. He reached out to me, and it was 134 days after I made a video about him, and he just so happened to be from Las Vegas, and then a Las Vegas number called me on the Jesuit anniversary, so I was like, what are the odds of this? And then, of course, we get the big Las Vegas shooting just, 3 days after the Jesuit anniversary. There's much more to that as well, but just making a point, and who knows whatever happened to that guy. Maybe he doesn't want to call me back, or maybe I should reach out to him again or something, but he seems like a pretty legit guy, and his book seems pretty cool. I actually went out and bought the book and read it, and, it's a pretty good book. But then I've also seen that new movie on Netflix where he supposedly stole from the other guy, and that guy was all synced up to The Price is Right just by the numbers and everything else too. So I think I have a video on that somewhere, but I'll just skip over that. Just wanted to get the point across that, I get a call on the Jesuit anniversary from somebody from Las Vegas, which, no one was calling me from Las Vegas at the time at all. And then that guy reaches out to me. He just so happens to be from Las Vegas. Then we get the Las Vegas shooting. Then we get the death of Ralphie May in Las Vegas. And it was 1 month and 24 days after the video where I talked about fat comedians and the number 124. Remember the time too? The one summer when I was talking about there was a big drowning thing just after XXX Tentacion died and so on. And then his cousin supposedly drowned in a pool. And I had synchronicity with the band Drowning Pool, and I mentioned how there was a goalie from the Philadelphia Flyers who had died, and I mentioned how it was synced up to Goldberg the goalie from the Mighty Ducks, and he had died. He drowned. That's what it was. That guy had drowned. And I said, I wonder if we're going to get another story about drowning in the media, synced up to the Mighty Ducks of some sort. And then, of course, the next day we got the duck boat drowning in Branson, Missouri, if I can find it here. 11 drown after boat capsized in Missouri, right? So, talking about this Mighty Duck theme and how it's synced up to a drowning thing. And then, of course, the next day there's a duck boat drowning, and what are the odds? I didn't predict that there would be a duck boat drowning in Branson, Missouri, but I was sure right on with the pattern, And I mean, I haven't been studying this for that long, you know what I mean? I've gotten a lot better over the years, but, it's a work in progress. There's a lot to understand. There's sometimes where I will document something, such as the Kansas City Chiefs being important to the Eagles and the Rams, and it just doesn't happen for years, but it always goes back to what I was talking about from years before. It's synced up exactly. The Chiefs, I thought they're going to win Super Bowl 50 because of a number of things, and Chiefs equal 50. Then they go on and win for the first time in 50 years in the 50th modern era Super Bowl. So, you have to just keep following these patterns, and sometimes you have to use hindsight to understand the pattern. So, just because it doesn't happen right away, it doesn't mean that these things that are going on aren't eventually going to happen. There's always different things that are connected to it, building up this narrative. And, it's not really that difficult if you just pay attention and make sure you document a lot of things so you can find your old information and see how it is the patterns connect, And maybe there's an easier way that I don't know how to do this because, like I said, I've just kind of figured it out over the years from other people and whatnot, Gematria, I learned a lot from Zachary K. Hubbard, but figuring out patterns and other things I learned from tons of other people and also just from my own experience. So I'm just saying, we're all putting these pieces together. We're trying to figure out how to perfect this and how to, how it's done and what exactly is going on. But apparently it's just meaningless. And saying that you